let's start just by kind of getting into some basics of how do you actually achieve financial independence? Well, at any age, to retire securely, to build some assets, you have to at some point live below your means. So you have something to save and invest, which eventually will then grow and support you indefinitely. So that's how you would achieve financial independence. If you want to do this FIRE aspect where you're kind of taking a 30, 40-year accumulation period where you're saving and investing and cramming it down into a decade or two so you can retire early and have a longer retirement period, that requires having a sustainably high savings rate. And everybody focuses on a high savings rate, but notice I capitalize sustainably. And that's because even if we talk about like 10 or 15 years in comparison to a 30 or 40-year typical period, that sounds short. But if you're struggling and scrimping and sacrificing every step of the way, for the vast majority of people, that's not going to be sustainable. So you have to find a way to live well below your means and do so comfortably, and so you enjoy your life, so you can sustain it, and it makes sense and it's worthwhile. So the best place for people to start is housing, cars, and food. And that's just, again, kind of common sense and really basic math, because if we look at the average American spending, about half of it goes to housing, cars, and food. So if we want to have a high savings rate, it makes sense to start in the area where we're spending most of our money and trying to optimize there. The alternative, I guess, would be to not optimize there and try to save everything else. And then it gets, again, into that idea of scrimping and sacrificing rather than enjoying your life. As far as people who are not FIRE people coming into this concept applies to anybody who is maybe struggling and wants to increase their savings and wants to change their financial picture. As an example, I was talking to someone who was getting close to retirement and was thinking about pulling the trigger. And when we first met, they talked about having two houses and always wanting to snowbird, spending part of their time in the north and then the winters where it's warm. We ran their numbers and went over some projections with them, and it wasn't super optimistic. It wasn't a great outcome when we presented the initial numbers. And so I just kind of presented to them. I asked them if I could show them something, and I showed them their housing, their numbers if we sold one of the houses. And not only does that free up capital, which then could go to be invested and create income versus kind of just sitting there and taking up space, it also cuts, everything that goes with homeownership, insurance, fees, everything that goes with it. They got very silent, and I was kind of worried that I offended them. And I said, I know you said you wanted to have two houses. Tell me what you're thinking. Are you upset by that? And he said, actually, we were looking up realtors as you showed it because it made such a difference. And that's kind of the case for most people. So if you can make big changes in these few areas, I think you're going to see a dramatic change in your financial picture. And again, if you're not willing to budge there, it is going to be harder to develop that initial savings rate. And I do think it's worth kind of pausing there just for a second and just kind of recognizing that for a lot of people, housing and cars, it is kind of a definition of how you should show your success, maybe a status symbol. And for some people, that is going to feel like a bit of sacrifice. But again, it's kind of the biggest areas, and that's where you really kind of need to start at least making some improvements in those areas for most people to develop that savings rate. After that, though, I will say the second side of the slide, I call this throwing gas on the fire, because when you start to do these things, you really start to see your financial picture improving really quickly. And even more importantly than that, these are things that no one would consider sacrifice, no one would not want to do. And not only are you spending less, but you're actually going to tend to live better because you'll have more money freed up to spend on things you want to do, or like I said, to speed up your time to financial independence if that's your goal. So the first one is paying less taxes. And I'm not going to say anything more than the fact that this whole FIRE lifestyle, living well below your means, is very tax efficient on many fronts. And so we're going to spend a whole slide talking about tax planning opportunities a little bit later in the presentation. The second thing is needing less insurance. I again, don't know anybody who would get excited to spend more money on insurance premiums. But the people who can least afford insurance are really the people that most need it. Because insurance is a kind of a combination of how likely a negative event is going to happen to you, and then the impact if you have that event. So if you're really kind of struggling paycheck to paycheck and you don't have much in savings, any little thing can cause an impact to your finances, and it can be a stressful thing. So you tend to need insurance. As you start to build your savings, you need less and less insurance. And so that's more money than you can direct to investments and saving or just spending and doing the things that you want to do. The third thing on the list there is investment fees. And I think if anybody here, I know everyone here is already Abundo clients. So I think we kind of hammer that home. And that's probably how a lot of you found us, is because we do focus so much on investment fees. But I am going to take a step back because I know, again, because we try to serve a different clientele than traditional financial advisors, we do have people that, aren't coming in with $500,000 of assets for us to manage. Investments fees do matter, but they don't matter until you're able to save and you actually have investments. But once you do, by cutting those fees, by investing in a cost and tax efficient way, you can really speed up your time to financial independence by eliminating the drag of fees that not only slow you down because of the fees themselves, but the way that most people tend to invest those funds and the strategies that tend to cost a lot also tend to perform worse over time. So kind of ironically. And then the final thing, again, this is something that Abundo was kind of founded on, was Eric's love of travel credit card rewards. And this is something we love to talk to clients about. And this is really something that I think a lot of time people view personal finance as boring and maybe stressful. And again, for some people, even traumatic. Using travel credit card rewards is kind of, in my opinion, one of the most fun things you can even talk about with personal finance, because we're doing something that most people want to do more of and love to do, which is travel, and you're actually spending less to do it. But again, this is on that side of a more advanced technique, because my background, I was a physical therapist in my original career. And so I kind of had it hammered into me, always first, do no harm. And so as I think about travel credit card rewards, I'm certainly not excited to start down the path of, something where people can get themselves in more trouble if they're already struggling with paycheck to paycheck and being behind and already having credit card debt. But again, as you master the fundamentals, which is that left side of the screen, all these things on the right side really speed things up and make your life better while you're saving more.